Weekday mornings 5 till 7 on Talk Radio 640 WGST.
Welcome back, and if you're just tuning in, you're listening to HealthTech Talk, broadcasting on the iHeartRadio network from 640 WGST and streaming worldwide on the iHeartRadio network. With me is John Nosta. He is the founder and creator of NostaLab, and so, you know what, I've been in the digital media, digital health, mHealth space basically since its inception, which just don't get the audience, let's not get crazy about it. It's what, maybe 5, 6 years old at the max. But John is one of the leading voices in the whole convergence of technology and medicine. And I say a lot of good things about a lot of our guests, but this guy is one of the few people in the whole digital health, mHealth space that I truly say I can respect. I read what he writes. I follow him on Twitter. He's actually gets what's good and bad about the space. He's not just all about the hype. Think about this. He is a top 10 in Farmers 100. He's on the HIT 100 list. He's like the who's who of digital health and IT. I could go on and on of all of his organizations. Check this out. One of the neat things, his tweets, his impressions on Twitter have been over 31 million impressions. He doesn't have 31 million followers yet, but 31 million impressions, which blows me away. He has built a reputation as a vocal advocate for strategic thinking and creativity. I am so happy to finally have you on the show, John. How are you?
Ben, why don't we end the interview right there? Because I think that I can certainly not meet those expectations that you've established. It is an unqualified pleasure to get a chance to chat with you again.
I love it because you know what, this space is really evolving and it's really exciting. So let me ask you a question. You know, your background, you worked with a lot of the big agencies like Ogilvy and Common Health. You were chief creative officer. You're chief strategic officer. You've been a president. What is the main focus of NostaLab's lab?
You know what? It's easy. NostaLab exists to empower innovation through creativity and communication. And I'll give you this example. If you wink in the dark, you know you're doing it, but no one else does. And I feel that's part of the challenge in any sort of fundamental shift, whether that be in a clinical environment. For example, when we first found out that gastric ulcers are largely due to an infection, a Helicobacter pylori infection. That took many years to catch on. And we have to empower innovation through effective tools, through effective strategies, so that the idea sticks to the roof of your customer's brain. And as I work in digital health, as I begin to understand some of the dynamics, I'm afraid that people will, A, misinterpret it by thinking it's a sexy tracker, an activity tracker, or B, people will miss the boat completely. And I think in the final analysis, what will happen is lives will be lost because people fail to engage in what I believe is a fundamental inflection point in human history.
So how do we get that message out?
We get that message out by standing on the soapbox and banging the drum, as we say. But I think importantly, it's the ability to connect with people on a variety of levels. And it's that connectivity that is going to help drive these fundamental changes. Let's take a step back. In the old days, the clinical medicine was about control.
Yep.
Or pharmaceutical selling was about control. We would craft a message in an advertising agency like Ogilvy, for example, and a humongous sales force would go out and sell that message to physicians who would then execute on that message. We have moved from control to collaboration, and that collaborative dynamic is expressed in all areas around digital health, namely things like social media, like the empowerment of the individual and the patient, caregiver, all these people who exist in a network, in a web, in a community, if you will, like Facebook. So the collaborative engagement, I believe, is one of the key aspects of helping get that message out. It's really about the diffusion of innovation. And the diffusion of innovation can be slow, or it could be more effective if we have key points of innovation, key nodes of communication. And I guess I try to be one of those voices of communication where I can push the message out to clinicians, to caregivers, to a variety of stakeholders.
So is the time right? Are we at that chasm where finally the technology is there, the patients, the payers, the providers, everyone's ready?
I think that we are very close to something. And I don't know if we're close to there, but I think we're close to what really is an inflection point in human history. And I've often talked about how the 21st century really didn't begin in the year 2000. Nothing happened in the year 2000 except for Y2K. Yeah. That didn't happen. But if we look back 100 years, we can see a model. And what we saw 100 years ago is nothing happened in the year 1900. But in the year 1914, 1915, 1916, around there, we had a variety of interesting events, from the empowerment of the individual through legislation, through child labor laws, through women's suffrage. We had the tragedy of World War I. We had the Russian Revolution, the theory of relativity. We actually had the ability to look up in the sky and see an airplane. We had a sense of wonder. And it was that confluence of events that the Industrial Revolution sprang from, and fundamental changes in the way we live as a society. And what we're seeing now is a similar confluence of events, from healthcare reform to social upheaval, to the empowerment and the democratization of the individual, to that same sense of wonder. But instead of looking up and seeing an airplane and saying, wow, I might go for a ride in that, we look out on the street and see a driverless car and say, wow, we may not be driving in a few years. So the signals point to a fundamental shift. And I believe that we're going to move into the era of health, where health becomes a fundamental aspect of the world we live in. And that's going to manifest in changes in longevity. It's going to be it's not a linear path, but right. I think those are some of the changes that push us along that way.
So the goal here, like one of the things is, so we're hopefully going to empower consumers, right, to take control of their health. I mean, and that's sort of what you're saying, right? We're going to give them the tools.
Yes. Well, I think that we are going to give people a window into the world they live in. And, it's been said that big data, this manifestation of all this data and all this input, is the third window into humanity. The first was the telescope, yep, where we saw that we lived in a world that was much greater and more vast than we ever thought. And, of course, the sidebar to that is it was a blasphemy. That observation was not well accepted. The second window was the microscope that looked into a world smaller than we could possibly imagine. And the third is going to be big data and the ability to see connectivity. So I think data will offer us the opportunity to be empowered as individuals, but it's not the sort of the isolated democratization of health. I think that this democracy might be more of a two-party system, that we have to embrace clinical medicine and the clinical experts who can help guide us through this path, as well as the empowerment of the individual. Now, that being said, I also will hold out one other opportunity for this political upheaval. And it may not be the democratization of health, but it very well may be mob rule, where we get to a state where people demand to own their own clinical data, where people demand to take an active role in health, especially in the millennials, the digital natives, people who have grown up in this context, see a whole new world emerging in front of them.
I can't agree with you more. It's like you're preaching to the choir. I'm also a big believer. I think the problem right now is there's a lot of data, and people aren't doing anything with the data, which is one of my biggest problems in we'll call it the whole wearable industry. Do you have an opinion on all these trackers and devices that are people, and do you have a favorite product out there that you're kind of into these days?
Well, let's start from my love-hate relationship with the trackers. Uh-huh. I've had pretty much all of them, from Fitbit to Fuel to a variety of activity trackers. For me, they do not represent the true promise of digital health. Yep. These devices are interesting. They do provide important data that will ultimately play a significant role. But the true magic of a tracker will be seen as we evolve to look at nanotechnology and the ability of this technology to track cancer in our body or to track the potential for a heart attack in our body. And when those things come around, people will no longer wear their tracker as an athletic option, but they'll wear it as a clinical imperative. So I think that that's going to be a fundamental shift. Some of the interesting devices, there's so many. I'll give you two simple examples. Yep. One is Kinza. Kinza is a digital thermometer. At face value, it's nothing that exciting. It's a thermometer that plugs into your smartphone, and you can track symptoms and temperature of you or let's say, a child. But the interesting thing about Kinza is it takes it to the next level. It takes the data, depersonalizes it, and pushes up into a cloud. And if we get enough people doing it, we can get very sophisticated heat maps about disease as measured by body temperature. But here's the cool part. It's not the United States of America or the world, it's your local community. It's the town you live in or your school district. So you can have real-life functional opportunities to put big data to work in your life.
John,
and stick in your community.
That is amazing, but I got to cut for a commercial. I am definitely going to have you back on the show. This was extremely fascinating. I have to take a break. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors.